Yeah, thank you so much, Anna, for the wonderful introduction, and thanks everyone for taking the time to be here to listen to my presentation. And the title of my presentation is Au Pairs in Germany, Contesting Precarity through the Mediatization and of Emotions and Lived Experiences of Filipino au pairs in Germany. Just to kind of contextualize the project, I actually did a pilot study of this project when I was in Göttingen last year at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity. And at that time, I was really focusing more on the lived experiences. The mediatization angle came in much later when I started looking at TikTok and other forms of social media. And this was the inspiration for this Auerbach project that I'm developing with Anna Storch. And Anna, thank you so much for the wonderful conversations that we've had. And I'm excited to share some findings of the work that I've been doing for the past 6 weeks or so since I got here in October. So quite a lot are preliminary stuff, but I think I should be able to tell a solid argument at the end of the lecture. And I want to begin the lecture by showing you this screenshot of an article from Die Zeit, which was only published on the 13th of November, just a few days ago. In my A2 German, this says, von so vielen Brot bekam ich Bauchschmerzen. Schon Kinder haben Termine, das Mittagessen muss man sich selber kochen. Aber der Umgang miteinander ist liebevoll. Was Au pairs in deutschen Familien erleben. And this article, of course, talks about the struggles that au pairs in Germany continue to face in this day and age. As we can see here, an au pair complaining about being overfed with bread, which I don't know how Germans actually do that to themselves. But these concerns continue in this day and age, and the struggles that au pairs face is something that really inspired me to do this work. And this is what I'm going to cover in my lecture. So, of course, I'm going to start by discussing why I consider au pairing to be a side of precarity. And of course, this will begin with the question of who is the au pair and why should we care? And then I'll introduce the current project where I talk about the methods and the participants, and then I'll talk about my theoretical framing. Anna already said that I'm a sociolinguist. To be honest, more of a socio than a linguist recently. And I'm looking specifically at reflexivity, mediatization, and an account of emotions. And then I'll introduce 5 findings. And then I will conclude with some questions which I think should orient our minds towards a sociolinguistics of hope. So let's begin. The au pair scheme is initially a program that was made in a very European context for self-development and mobility for young women. Au pair in French literally means at par, at equal shares, or in mutual terms. And the idea is the host families and the au pairs should have a mutually beneficial relationship. In the 19th century, there was a phenomenon called the Welschlandia, which refers to the phenomenon of young German-speaking women living with French-speaking Swiss families while also preparing for the role of a housewife. It is only in 1969 when the Council of Europe formalized the arrangement through the 1969 European Agreement on Au Pair Placement. And the idea of this was to institutionalize practices, form regulations, and perhaps avoid abuses. However, through the decades, it has been clear that the idea of a mutually beneficial relationship is at best contentious and at worst a myth. Here you see 2 pictures from a website called aupairworld.com, one of the leading websites used by au pairs and host families to find one another. On the left-hand side is a page for au pairs, and on the right-hand side is a page for the host families. There are boxes, which should highlight my observations. We can see that for aspiring au pairs, au pairing is packaged as an adventure. But for potential host families, it is packaged as a childcare solution. An aspiring au pair agentively becomes an au pair, akin to some sort of a transformation of the self that is key to have the time of your life. But for host families, an au pair is just someone for your family. Aspiring au pairs are lured with living in a foreign country, learning the language and experiencing the culture of the country, and make friends from around the world, with the concomitant effects of having something great for your CV. Host families, on the other hand, are told that au pairs are a modern solution, seemingly treating au pairs as literal tools. Au pairs are portrayed as people who bring you highly flexible childcare in your home, as if care is divorced from the provider, with the side effects of having a cultural cooperation and not an exchange. And if you look at the descriptions above, we can see that for aspiring au pairs, traveling to and living with the host family is presented before the need to provide childcare and light housework, while for the host families, the benefits of having au pairs are foregrounded. This probably explains why recent literature in the social sciences have really portrayed au pair as a site of precarity. There's a lot of research about au pairs and how it is a migration process. The consensus is au pair is an easy migration route for people to just move to a richer country and stay there permanently somehow. People have also characterized au pair as some sort of a labor and domestic care work. And there's a lot of literature which suggests that au pairs are treated as cheaper nannies, making, as Dalga says, cultural exchange a mere side effect of this labor arrangement. There are also accounts that show how au pairs are related to the biographical development of young adulthood. And the problem here is that even though the au pair is supposed to learn about cultural norms of being in a house, they are perceived as a threat to the mother and the wife. And I think undergirding all these three strands of au pair research is the idea of precarity. Jeserich says au pairs are temporary migrants. As such, they also represent the inequalities visible today in migration and globalization processes. Hansen and Peterson say they have no access to labor unions and they are living in precarious conditions. Hess and Puck-Haber, this is a bit cheeky though, they said this in a sarcastic way, big sisters are better domestic servants. And Rosie Cox actually provocatively asks in a handbook, are au pairs still sisters or have they become modern day slaves? And I think due to the flawed regulations and high number of abuses, this scholarship is probably warranted. We cannot deny that au pairing has become a site of precarity and inequality. And I am not here to deny that. However, I'm here to ask, is there more to the story? Because if we look at scholarship and look at diagrams like this from Gonsalves and Schulter, we can see that au pairs are literally equated to nannies, which is something that my participants, as we see in this screenshot above, explicitly deny. Au pair is not a cleaning lady or a full-time nanny. And while there is certain value to producing visual representations like this, I think it can also be dangerous. For instance, based on these hierarchical relations, au pairs are treated as of the same level as cleaning personnel or elder care workers. Perhaps there is value for the scholarly view, but is that how au pairs actually see it? I think it is undeniable that au pairs are characterized as people who occupy an astraral position between different dichotomies, temporary versus permanent, cultural exchange versus emotional labor, north and south, care and belonging, host and home, global and local. And scholars have argued that this unique position is what drives the precarity. But I wonder, does this unique position also come with opportunities for contesting that inequality and maybe promising mobility? And therefore, I ask, how must an au pair find himself or herself between all these? And while it is impossible to dismantle structures of inequality and forms of precarity and au pairing, is there a way for au pairs to speak out and speak back, to borrow the words of Ashcroft et al.? And most importantly, how do we locate that voice? How do we hear that voice? And how do we follow that voice? Jeserich identifies two main types of au pairs: the privileged ones who can travel and experience the world, and those who are not so privileged, who unfortunately have to use the au pair arrangement as a migration strategy to overcome economic obstacles in their home countries. Regardless of the type of au pair, Jeserich says that they're driven by two factors. Push factors, which are the wish to leave home, and pull factors, which is the appeal of a foreign culture. And while the literature has widely documented push and pull reasons, it tends to treat them as binary. And I think that's problematic. I see them as simultaneous orientations towards different centers of authority, which entail different structures and forms of precarity and precarization. And here I refer to the notion of polycentricity by Jan Blommert, a sociolinguist. Blommert asks, how do we imagine such patterns of authority and power? I would suggest that authority emanates from real or perceived centers to which people orient when they produce an indexical trajectory in semiosis. And very often, such authorities have names, faces, a reality of their own. They can be individuals, teachers, parents, collectives, groups, punk, gothic, abstract entities or ideals, the church, the nation state, the middle class, and so on. The macro and micro structures of our everyday world. Thus, I think that we need to look at precarity not just as about immediate individuals serving centers of power, such as the host parents. Rather, I think that there are more centers that au pairs must simultaneously orient themselves to, such as the individual, their host siblings, their families back home, their friends, romantic partners, collectives, virtual communities, networks, or even abstract entities or ideals such as the notion of a good au pair, the idea of cultural exchange, the possibility of a post-au pair future, the concept of home. And to just explain this, let's look at an example of polycentric precarity. This is an example from Miles, who very thankfully joined us today. And I will first start by clicking the video that she uploaded in Facebook. Here you can see Miles talking about the immediate effects of the au pair year. We will talk about that in greater detail. But Miles also posted a Facebook post on the right-hand side. When things didn't work out between me and my ex last 2018, I went around the Philippines. I hopped from one island to another like Siargao, Davao, Bohol, applied for a new job, and stayed in Cebu for a couple of years. I started from scratch. I decided to give love another try. Fast forward, after almost 3 years, I broke up with my ex last 2021, got my visa, moved to Germany, and went around Europe. This time not from scratch, but from experience. I used to blame myself as to why my relationships failed, but looking back, I can confidently say that it happened because I'm bound to be somewhere else. A series of failures prepared me for a future of resilience. I don't regret enduring so much pain. If anything, it stretched my patience more than ever, made me stronger. Now that I know better, I could go further. And here we can see another layer of precarity, the precarity of her past life in the Philippines, driving her to Germany. In an interview that we did during this project, Miles said, she shared her experiences with her host family. I can't even rest and study since the girls were crying all night long, and the elder sister liked sleeping in my room, which also took my privacy away. Their house was also disgusting. I was overworking and I was barely sleeping. I did not have peace of mind, despite my attempt to communicate with them. It turned out even worse. It came to a point when I was having nightmares about my host mom standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me, smiling. It was traumatizing. And she has those movies with doll eyes and the smile doesn't really match the eyes. It was traumatizing. Like, I needed therapy after that. It took me more than 1 month to gather my courage, to leave. And they took my allowance away from me after knowing I already have a new host family who knew about what I went through and still managed to treat me poorly. Later in the interview, Miles also says, that's actually one of the main reasons why I'm here in Germany, to give them a better life, the family, and better healthcare for my dad, better healthcare for me. I want him to see other opportunities outside the Philippines, not limited. our options. We always have something out there, something, yeah. So that kept me going. Here we can see that Miles is centrifugally forced from the dire socioeconomic conditions of the Philippine context to be centripetally attracted to better conditions in Germany. But at the same time, she's centripetally oppressed by her host families in Germany, but centrifugally motivated to keep going by her dreams for herself and her family in the Philippines. Thus, this is a case of an unending negotiation of choices and endurance, and we see this in her Facebook posts, which seem to capture and freeze the moment, but also serve as a reminder of the past. And these content also gets consumed by others who may learn lessons from them. And towards the latter part of the video, Miles says she did the video so she can heal and move on. And this is where my project comes in. So my general goal is to understand that, yes, the very structure of au pairing is inherently precarious, but I want to listen to the au pairs themselves and trace the agentive choices that they make to negotiate these polycentric precarities. And my research questions are these. How does the mediatization of emotions and lived experiences enable Filipino au pairs to carve strategic positions for themselves in the precarious context of au pairing? And secondly, how does the perspective of the Filipino au pairs enrich our understanding of the relationship between language, emotions, and well-being? I'm focusing on language because, yes, I am a linguist, but also because, as Monica Heller says, language is both a key domain of struggle over difference and inequality. So this current project involved qualitative interviews with 10 current and former Filipino au pairs in Germany through snowball sampling. I did a multimodal discourse analysis of, well, the final data set was 47 social media content, such as TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook Reels. And I did a threefold analytical focus. First, I analyzed how my participants talked about their experiences before, during, and after the au pair year. Then, I analyzed how my participants decide on what to post on social media about au pairing. And finally, I tried to analyze how reflexive communicative acts and accounts of emotions are embedded in the interviews and the social media content. Just a note, most of the interviews were conducted in Taglish, which is a term that we use for Tagalog in English. It's actually a linguistic term. And all of the extracts in today's lecture were obviously in English, and the translations were made by me. Participants were given a choice to be anonymous or not. 7 out of 10 chose to not be anonymous, and I think that says something. And those who chose to be anonymous were given the chance to pick their own pseudonym. And so if you see a name in quotation marks, that means to say it's a pseudonym. Just to contextualize the project, here we see statistics. This is a table of the number of registered Filipino au pairs by country of destination. And we see Germany as number 4. This is for Filipinos. Excuse me. The numbers in the beginning are actually very low. Denmark had 1,000, then Germany had 38. But if we see towards the end, Germany is actually getting quite a lot of au pairs these days. We also see countries which now have blank entries. These are countries that the Philippine government has banned to be destinations for au pairs due to very high cases of abuse, like Switzerland. I wasn't dissing Switzerland. Okay. And the graph that I generated here just shows the percentage of growth of the number of au pairs in Germany. There's a big spike after COVID, where we can see that in the beginning it's just like really low, and after COVID we see a significant increase of au pairs in Germany. We also see that au pairs are still heavily female, which makes this still a very feminized industry. It's not a requirement. Males can be au pairs as well. And we also see that Filipino au pairs tend to be highly educated. If we count people with some degree of college level, college refers to uni education or college graduates, that's 71% of the total number of au pairs. So these are my participants, and we can also see that 8 of my participants are college graduates. 1 has an MBA, and 1 is a senior high school graduate. 3 are currently doing their au pair year, and 7 are still here on different tracks, such as Ausbildung, FSU, language visa. 5 federal states were represented. I was unfortunately unable to find anyone from East Germany, and all au pairs are beyond the A1 level of German right now. A1 is a requirement to be an au pair in Germany, so they all come here with A1, but now some of them are even at the C level, like Patricia is in C1? Yeah. Okay. And just a graphic representation of the geography. The first is the Philippine map of where they came from. So we can see that it's quite a mix from the 3 main island groups, the north, the middle, and the south. And in Germany, we see the red homes. That is where they did their au pair year. And the purple dots and the line represents the movement, where they are right now. Okay. And so now, how do we make sense of these narratives then? How do I make sense of the data? And we move on to the framing. So I look at interviews and online content as instances of meta-communication, which are statements that report, describe, interpret, and evaluate communicative acts and processes. And I do not just look at the whats of the discourses in terms of content value, what people say. I also look at the hows, how utterances are phrased, how they form intertextual links between one another. For instance, how do the interview utterances form intertextual content with the actual content that they posted? Let's take a look at an example from Charmaine. Charmaine has an MBA, and now she works as a part-time treasury analyst in Hessen. She posts online content, but never with explicit au pair identifiers, such as hashtag au pair. And I asked her why in the interview. And she says, so I'm not sharing the au pair content? And then I asked, is it fear that they're going to judge you? And she says, yeah, it's like being a nanny. Going here, I'm just scared. Like, they judge me, you're an au pair. And I want, after my au pair year, I want to show off success. I have fear sometimes, like what people are thinking. And then I said, about you being an au pair? And she says, yeah, that. Like, they're going to judge me. Yeah, I'm just scared of their judgment because they look at you in the Philippines so high and then you come here a nanny. That's why. Some videos that she posted online way before I even met her include these too. Now, while she shows struggles such as a $10 bank account in video 1, it is clear that both videos are about pleasant experiences, traveling, drinking, partying, Brussels, Eiffel Tower. She says, the little girl in me, which implies that this little girl is within the current big girl that she is now, which may suggest growth and maturity, while nonetheless reminiscing of the past within the present. She uses the verb realizes, which may denote a mental process, yes, but this is a powerful mental process because it indicates meta-awareness about her thinking. She says these days, which denotes temporal proximity, which implies that her dreams have already been realized. In the interview, she says it's like being a nanny. And then she eventually says, you come here, a nanny. She hedged a little in the beginning by using like, and eventually it materialized. She isn't like a nanny anymore. She is a nanny. She initially said that she disliked it when people thought of au pairs as nannies, but what's suggested here is that she may probably subscribe to that view as well. When she says, after my au pair year, I want to show off success, it creates a pragmatic implicature that the au pair year is not success, and it is only now that she was able to realize her dream. Thus, she seems to have internalized the very judgment that she says she is afraid to receive from others. And in a way, she's using the judgment of others to probably make it less clear that that's her judgment of herself as well. So that's why I think that these are metacommunicative strategies. And in this case, there is an alignment with what she says and what the videos show, but this is not always the case because disjunctions happen. So I view the data as reflexive acts of identification with being an au pair, for instance, identity construction, such as being an au pair content creator, relationality, a source of information for others perhaps, an expression of emotions and experiences, which are things that I cannot concretely observe or measure. And this is something that I've written about as well with a colleague. So why am I looking at the social media angle? I look at the social media angle because I think these are examples of mediatization, which Hiramoto and Joseph Park define as process through which the media organizes and orients the perception and interpretation of social roles and values, which is constantly at work in our construction and interpretation of social identity. And I argue that these mediatized practices provide us with a vantage point for understanding the au pair's identity, but also how that relates to social processes, such as reaching others or expanding the semiotic realm of the notion of an au pair. Moreover, I think that social media discourses are examples of what Charles Briggs, an anthropologist, calls communicability, which he defines as a term that puns on various senses of the word. In normal usage, communicability suggests volubility, the ability to be readily communicated and understood, and microbes, capacity to spread. Communicability is infectious, the way texts and the ideologies find audiences and locate them socially and politically. And finally, I'm very interested in looking at emotions in the videos and in the interviews because I think they're really incorporated in this. And I heavily follow Sarah Ammit's formulation that emotions are the result of the discursive alignment between self and other. It is through the movement or circulation of texts that people are aligned with others by attributing others as the source of our feelings. I may not be able to observe actual Gefühl, I learned this from Martin, but these accounts of Emotionen can help us understand people. And I also propose that we need to view emotions as inherently chronotopic, following Mikhail Bakhtin. Chronotopes were actually a big thing in linguistics these days. Blomert defines it as historically configured tropes of how it was can be invoked as relevant context in discourse and affect what can and does happen in discursive events. Asif Aga says that a chronotope is a semiotic representation of time and place, peopled by certain social types. It links representations of time to those of locale and personhood. And thus, I think that viewing emotions as chronotopic allows us to see how my participants orient towards the logics of the world that they inhabit in the interview or online content, but also the actual world itself. These accounts of emotions can thus help us appreciate how my participants deploy them to index their understanding of themselves and the very notion of au pairing as embedded in spatio-temporal realities. And again, thanks Martin, I think viewing emotions as chronotopes allow us to read people in the first place. And now let's take a look at some preliminary findings. So I want to start by talking about the language ideologies of communication problems in quotation marks. It is a term that we always use, but we rarely don't understand like what communication problems really mean. Many of my participants attributed domestic issues such as, being treated unfairly to communication problems. They seem to rationalize the existence of these problems by portraying differences in communicative styles as normal and incontestable, and as things that they cannot help or cannot do anything about because they are differences. Look at some examples here. Jeremy says, my family, they're all German. That's why I found it hard because they didn't really speak English. When I got here, my German was not even really A1. I only knew simple words like kochen. I didn't understand them and I really needed English, but they didn't speak English regularly, so I really suffered. And then I wanted to express my frustration the way they treated me, but I couldn't say it, so that made me even more stressed. He also says, I don't know if you have experience with children here in Germany, but they're very spoiled, especially when they are rich. My host family was rich. They lived by the beach side of Hamburg. I don't want to stereotype them as parents who spoil their kids, but they really feel like what they're doing is gentle parenting. They just let the children do whatever. Basically, the kids are always followed. Nika says, so I thought if I demanded changes with my schedule or if I complained, it might lead to a gap in our relationship. Uziel says, I don't open up. It's because I'm not expressive. If I can do what needs to be done, I can do it without complaining. She also later on adds, I regret not opening up my feelings. Yes, I'm not expressive. I do not open my side about how I feel. What do these examples say? We look at choice of language, parenting styles, the ability to complain or speak up once concerns are used as justifications for certain behaviors that happen during their au pair year. The participants seem to rationalize them by treating them as inherently incontestable. Jeremy says, I'm really sensitive to their culture as a Filipino. Rose says, at first I was scared of the Deutsch because their personalities are stark. Charmaine says, it's like the Filipino culture. Shy at first, very reserved, not so open. That's me. Okay. What are the problems with these? I think that the problems with denaturalizing these kinds of communication problems results in masking abuse. And this also results in the exoneration of the abusers because the actions become portrayed as not by choice, but as something that can't be helped. National identities such as Filipino or Deutsch become essentialized, and this essentialism leads to an internalized acceptability. They literally blame themselves. This is a literal voicelessness. When Jeremy says, I really had a hard time with the language because I'm a perfectionist, and like I didn't want to speak German if I knew I wasn't going to say incorrect things, and if I knew that my German was going to be full of mistakes, I would rather not speak at all. And I think this results in the self-responsibilization and the entrepreneurial self, literally technologies of the self by Foucault. The idea that one should take care of oneself, and if you don't, it is oneself's fault. And even if we don't help you to take care of yourself, it is your onus to take care of yourself. Let's look at an example from Rose. All right. During the interview, I asked Rose, why do you make content like that? Why do you want to help people, make their host siblings today? She says, if I am to be a content creator, I should have content. It should be meaningful. People must learn from it. Then I want to share my experiences with others. The opportunities I learned, I want to share them with others. So at least I can share with others, they will be aware, and then maybe in the future I can monetize it and get many views. And so that's how I ended up making content. And on the other hand, they're also memories for me, remembrance. And Rose also says that she wishes that people, her viewers, would just read it, read the advice that she gives them, so that it's not only I who is here, you too can be here. And I think this is an example of how she transforms past experiences of the self into future lessons for others. Not only I who is here is spatio-temporal marking. You too can be here includes a modal of possibility for the viewer, Ken, which can be read as an encouragement from someone who has successfully done so and therefore has the ethos to say this. She is here for them who are over there, who may also come here. Thus, she positions herself as someone who has navigated this difficulty. So next is how my au pairs participants talked about German as a source of and a tool against precarity. So the au pair's lack of German skills, A1 only, is also portrayed as a reason for precarity. We saw that in Jeremy's case earlier, right? Many of them actually took unofficial A1 Deutsch course only to pass the test. And this is driven by money. The Goethe Institute in Manila charges 361 euros for one level, like A1, and the unofficial ones from, people on the internet, 80 euros for exam preparation. And Janice says, times when I felt sad as an au pair? None. Perhaps only the German language. The German language barrier is really the number one problem. And I think the problem here is not just that they couldn't communicate, but the very language is portrayed as a cause of suffering. Nika says, I don't know, but I feel so insecure right now because I swear, this is the first time that I feel that I'm being left behind in class. Because before I got used to always being with the class. Since elementary up until college, I always thought, I can do this. I can do this. But like this time, there are two topics that I couldn't understand my professor. I answered and I got a low score. So I developed anxiety and an existential crisis if I can really do this. And then I consulted my host mom and I am considering stopping my lessons because it feeds my insecurities instead of motivation. And here we see two examples. I will not play them because they're screenshots. In video one, Alex shows herself reading her German textbook. The video is edited to be intentionally blurry, which graphically evokes a feeling of dizziness and state of confusion. Take note that the caption says, how my mind feels every time I learn Deutsch. In the second video, Alex shows what a day of being a Deutsch course student is, like with the caption, another day of suffering or struggling to understand of German. Thus, the German language is treated as a tangible entity that causes frustration, exasperation, paghihirap, which translates to suffering or struggle in English. But it's also treated as a tool to contest one's precarious conditions. Uziel says, just don't disturb me when I'm studying Deutsch, because that is the most important thing for me, because I'm building up a future and the greatest foundation of that is the language. Charmaine says, so I went to Sprachvisum for 6 months until now, until November, and then just to focus on the study of the language. Of course, you need language to find a job here in Germany. And then I found a job anyway. That's why I extended. Yeah, it was so hard. Learning German beyond A1 is actually optional for au pairs. They're entitled to a meager 70 or 80 euro language learning allowance, but they nonetheless try to continue because of future plans. Many of them intend to stay in Germany after their au pair year to do an Ausbildung, FSJ, or other ways. Many of them also actually have successful Tinder relationships, and that's also a reason why they stay. And I think that what's happening here is an example of what Joseph Park would call the neoliberal promise of German, where German is being treated as a pure potential, a view of language as a completely neutral tool for conveying messages in an unadulterated way, a pure medium of potentiality that allows a speaker to achieve anything she wishes to. My participants seem to have internalized that yes, the suffering and the torture caused by the German language is probably something that you should just go through because of the neoliberal promise of being able to actually learn German later on. It's also quite interesting that during the interview, lots of code switching happened. They know that I only speak A2 German, and I don't really speak A2 German. Sprachvisum FSJ pronounces FSJ and not FSJ, for instance. Stark personalities, wie heißt das auf Deutsch? It's hard to ascertain why my participants do that, but it could be a performative self-presentation during the interview, that they want to portray themselves as someone who has actually taken the time to invest in learning German. But I think what's really inspiring is they also see beyond the self. They practice German with other au pairs, and even this, something that was done by Alex, Just last week, Alex ran a free online Deutsch course on her public Facebook page. For 5 days, online free tutorial. She's not a teacher of German, and she says this in this post, but she wanted to share and help others. Third finding, future-orientedness. So, as I've said, many of them stay in Germany, and despite all the hardships presented, it seems to be a better option than returning for many of them. And this results in far from ideal setups, such as the FSJ. And what I noticed is that the very idea of being prepared for what happens to you after the au pair is being presented as something that's part of a good au pair identity. Nika says this: I find it difficult to make friends. They said they don't want to hang out with me because they say it's not in my mind to be serious about life, because it's so easy for me to spend money, things like that. They ask, why do I travel every month when I should be saving up, because we are not permanent here. When you return to the Philippines, you should have savings, something like that. But what I think is, it is rare for us to be in Europe, so when should I travel? It's like that. So this is why sometimes I have friends who are now just acquaintances. They say it is hard to be friends with me because I'm not serious about life. And that's another reason why I'm having depression. No, maybe sadness in my life. Here we see a clear tension between the socio-legal definition of an au pair, as someone who only receives an allowance to travel, versus how au pairs actually see it, that the allowance is for savings to offset the temporariness of the position and to prepare for the future. Nika is seen as not future-oriented, even though she has clear plans. She wants to do an MA, she wants to do an Ausbildung, she may want to do an FSJ, and it depends on her Anerkennung and eventual German proficiency. Here, spending and traveling are seen as acts of present indulgence and antithetical to long-term projection of your life after an au pair. For her, she's seizing the day, but for her friends, she's not thinking of her future, and she doesn't deserve their friendship. Thus, she seems that she is against the tayo, which is the we group identity of au pairs, because she is seen to be not future-oriented. And many of my participants also make TikTok and Facebook posts about what to do after the au pair year, such as this example. This is literally an instruction of what are the requirements for FSJ, for Ausbildung, for language visa, or to do another au pair year in another country. Okay. Number 4. Posting about au pair is actually what I think is an example of a spectrum of meta-communication. And I think they indicate how one affiliates with the group identity of an au pair. Jeremy says, yeah, I mostly post about travel, but I do not feel ashamed that I am an au pair. I am not ashamed, because I also post about that, even my mistakes. I also feel proud that I'm taking care of blonde kids, because blonde kids are highly seen in the Philippines. Sadly true. Rose says, I want to educate others and also preserve the memory. As a teacher in the Philippines, an educator, I want people to learn lessons from my content. And Alex says, well, I make content. I was bored. Before in the Philippines, I really like taking pictures, making vlogs, performing, acting beautiful. Aside from acting and feeling beautiful, so many people asked me questions about it, so I decided to make public the information to help others. And I also like meeting new people. I physically feel weak if I do not meet many people. But there are also others who distance themselves from the au pair identity. Janice says, I did not come here to post about au pair stuff. I came here for traveling. I do not want to have views just because I made content like, hey, how to be an au pair. I don't feel like it. I don't like that content. I just want happy content. There are already people like Alex who do that. If I do that, I do not have originality. I find it hard to explain. I'm not sure, but I feel like a jejemon. A jejemon is a slang from Tagalog, a Philippine subculture deemed from the lower socioeconomic and educational class who actually tend to type in sticky caps. That's the Wikipedia definition of a jejemon. Janice says, I want a clean feed. I want to set up a clean social media, just travels, #travels. And she says, now I take care of a child and I was a professional architect in the Philippines. And then I had to lower my pride to take care of a kid for a year. That's why it's connected to why I don't post #au-pair. Yeah, I'm not proud. It's just something that I have to do for my goal. I will only post once I have achieved the definition I've set for myself. Participants like Rose and Alex seem to be driven by their desire to make their transient experience timeless, while helping others. They present their spatio-temporal experiences as an au pair on social media, which some may argue is an example of context collapse. But I argue it's not context collapse at all. It is the opposite. It is the reconfiguration of context that social media offers that makes these affordances possible. And while these posts are spatio-temporally rooted, their recontextualization to social media results in a new spatio-temporal configuration as content for anyone that can be consumed anytime, anywhere. And those who actively avoid explicit au pair markers in their posts seem to be driven by spatio-temporal conditions as well, such as shame of choices that they made in the present to escape the past and plan a future. And perhaps posting about them would make permanent the experience that they personally think of as something that should just be temporary. And here I refer to a quote from Dalgas. The photograph has the potentiality of creating future selves, though photographs also set their subjects as a challenge of becoming more like the subjects they portray. From this perspective, the au pair's display of success is also a form of self-presentation that informs the audience of how they have been able to get the most out of their migration opportunity. While these photos relate to the expectations of self-development that these migrants associate with au pairing, they also influence the potential that prospective migrants associate with migration and the expectations from those left behind that the au pairs aim to fulfill during their time abroad. Such expectations are sometimes unrealistically high. Let's take a look at two examples. All right, so there was definitely a range of TikTok content types, such as, lecturing, like how to be an au pair, or even dance videos with text overlay. And then here we see, for instance, the first one is literally a lecture. The second one is a dance video. There was a question, how do you apply to be an au pair? And Alex was just dancing, showing the answers on the screen. These videos address viewers directly and form intertextual links with other online discourses. They talk about Facebook groups such as Filipino au pairs in Germany, or a private agency called Valerianis Agentur, which is owned by a former au pair, who now is a nurse, I think, in Vienna. And these result in concrete effects. This virtual community. In my interview with Miles, she says that people also contact her just because they came across her on Facebook. She doesn't know these people, but she's quite active in the Facebook group. She says, I heard about an au pair who almost jumped out of her window. I'm talking about almost, which means she was already on the balcony. And then she called me, and I barely know this person, and she was like, hi, Miles, casually. And suicide they don't really give signs and all that. She called me, and it was windy, and I can hear the wind, and she was like, Miles, I'm sorry. I was about to jump out of my window, and then I thought about you. It's like, what? Of course I was shocked. Can you tell me more about it? And she was like, yeah, I was abused. What? I think that collectively, the constellation of social media discourses about au pair may construct what Levinas calls the face as the extreme precariousness of the other. To respond to the face, to understand its meaning, means to be awake to what is precarious in another life, or rather, the precariousness of life itself. This cannot be an awakeness, to use this word, to my own life, and then an extrapolation from an understanding of my own precariousness to be an understanding of another's precarious life. It has to be an understanding of the precariousness of the other. That's Judith Butler. Unfortunately, the notion of that face is constructed for the viewers who may want to be an au pair, and that's unfortunately not seen by the host families. Now to conclude, we are indeed talking about a very precarious activity here. But how do we read things such as this? This is from my interview data. I ask, so what is your reason for making these like motivational posts? Do you want to motivate your Instagram friends or something? Nika says, no, just for remembrance. Because like I'm into journals and memories, so yeah, it's like way back in 2012, oh, that was me then. And now this is me. I tend to compare the past and present versions of myself so I can see if I made progress or if I just got old. There. Because when I compare myself before and today, it diminishes my envy of other people, so I made a hobby out of it. So I think, since I shouldn't compare myself to others, I should compare it to who I was before. I said, that's beautiful. So your Instagram posts, they're more for you than for others, is that right? Yes, yes. And then I said, aha, so would you also say that these motivational quotes, you're motivating yourself? And she says, yes, I could say yes, because I do not know how to motivate others. So yeah, that's only for myself, for remembrance that at some point in my life, I had a challenge like this, and then I survived it, which is why I am who I am now. Or how about this? Miles will read this tomorrow in the workshop that we are doing. I'm not sure, Miles, do you want to read this? Just so we can actually hear from you? Just this part, no?
Oh my gosh.
Because some of them may not be in the workshop tomorrow. Yeah.
So we spent over a week exploring the South, even crossing the border into Monaco. It was the highlight of my year, giving me something to look forward to and the hope that I desperately needed. As we parted ways, he told me, you're going to be successful. Whatever you want, you'll achieve it. Anything you put your mind and heart into. He said this in Marriott, Monaco, 2022. What's the worst that could happen? He could be wrong. What's the best that could happen? He could be right. His words gave me the strength to believe in myself again. So I sat on the train from Antibes to Nice, crying my frustrations and anger into the world. I was wiping my tears. I returned to Germany where a new family was waiting. As I whispered to myself, this has to be the last time I'm moving. I knew that the next time I move, it will be to a place of my own. And I was right. The universe seemed to conspire to make it happen. I really did get the job, my own apartment, my permit, and went to culinary school for a year and currently doing hotel management with Marriott International in the same city I fell in love with, Munich. Remember where this dream started? Marriott, Monaco, 2022. And you know where I'm writing this now? Marriott, Munich, 2024.
I think we should see these accounts as accounts of hope. For Nika, we are presented with a mediatized spatio-temporal view of the self. There seems to be satisfaction in making present and future progress based on the past self. There is an anticipation of future success based on the understanding of her past self. And social media becomes integral here. It freezes the spatio-temporal experience and simultaneously acts as a memento of the past and a motivation for a better future. For Miles, we can see this as an example of hope being a chronotopic construct. The spatial dimension of the Marriott, from Monaco Marriott to Munich Marriott, the temporal dimension from her au pair year to looking forward to the future, to reflecting on the past. These are all dimensions that simultaneously act together to construct hope in a very precarious activity. We typically see hope as a temporal activity. According to Rodrigo Borba, hope entails an anticipation of the future, of what has not yet become. But I think it is spatial too. Thus, I think that an account of precarity should also include an investigation of hope, since, as Daniel Silva and Jerry Won Lee argue, language itself is hope. And by mediatizing accounts of emotions and lived experiences, au pairs, as I've demonstrated, can construct their identities, configure social relations, carve strategic positions for themselves and others, and contest polycentric precarities. They may not, and perhaps they will never be able to dismantle polycentric precarities, but these banal acts are nonetheless consequential. The precarious life is not devoid of hope. I wish to conclude this presentation with a quote from Sarah Ahmed, who says that this is why justice has to leave room for feeling better, even if it's not about feeling better. Feeling better is not a sign that justice has been done, or nor should it be reified as the goal of political struggle. But feeling better does still matter, as it is about learning to live with the injuries that threaten to make life impossible. Thank you so much.